Grosse Fuge, or Great Fugue, is the original last movement of the B-flat quartet Opus 130. You can see my introduction to Opus 130 here. A critic for the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, the leading periodical for music at the time, wrote about the Grosse Fuge that it was for him unintelligible, like Chinese. After describing in colorful words what he perceived, he goes on to say, "But let us not rush to discard this work. Perhaps there will come a time when what appears to us at first glance to be obscure and confusing will in the future be perceived as clear and pleasing." I must say that for me this amazing piece of art has become increasingly exciting and dear to my heart since we started playing it about 7 years ago. It is also fascinating to follow the development which the fugue as a form has made in Beethoven's works. From the virtuoso celebration in the quartet Opus 59 No. 3, the weird and witty dance in the D major cello sonata, to the stunning examples in the Hammerklavier sonata and the last piano sonatas. Let me try to help a little by giving you a kind of map of this piece, as one can easily feel a bit lost when listening to it. The Grosse Fuge is actually not just one fugue at all, but a series of fugues that can also be seen as variations. First, a rough overview. It starts with an overtura, so named by Beethoven, where he gives a kind of index to the piece. Then we start with the fugues. A double fugue, meaning not just one theme, but rather two themes are used simultaneously, in 4 variations. These are the most radical and unruly parts of the piece. There follows a section titled Meno mosso e moderato in G-flat major, which has a very tender and celestial atmosphere. Next comes the Allegro molto e con brio, an exuberant dance in 6/8, turning into the second set of 3 fugues, playing with 3 different speeds of the same motif. The third one leads us to the culmination of all this. Another Meno mosso e moderato, this time in A-flat, a synthesis of the themes as an ecstatic hymn. After this we have a recapitulation of the stations we passed on the way. The Allegro molto 6/8 dance gets revisited and eventually peters out. There are unsuccessful attempts to restart the very first fugue and the G-flat Meno mosso, but then the coda enters with the definitive version of the main theme and a triumphant ride into the light. Let's now look at the different sections and the material in detail. The overtura starts with the unison G fermata, like a signal, G being the axis between E-flat, in which the previous movement, the cavatina, has ended, and B-flat, the main tonality of the fugue. Beethoven is giving us here an index to the piece, but in reverse order. First, the main theme is presented in unison and in G, and this is again the half-step motif that is at the core of the 3 quartets Opus 132, 130 and 131. Next, we get a taste of the scherzo-like 6/8 dance in G and C major. Also the Meno mosso e moderato section gets mentioned here in F major. Now the first violin in pianissimo tentatively presents a rhythmically peculiar form of the main theme in B-flat, consisting of 2 notes of the same pitch slurred together on the offbeat, a notation that even at the time led to questions, but probably means a kind of reiterating of the note. In the piano sonatas, Beethoven writes a change of finger for the second note, and this technique is known as Bebung or trembling. Embedded in the theme are the notes B, A, C, H in retrograde. If you look at the tonalities we have visited so far, you will see that we have been descending in fifth from G through C and F to B flat. And now we are ready to start the fugues. As mentioned before, this is a double fugue, the second theme being a dotted figure with leaps of a tenth, clearly related to the theme of the first movement of the Hammerklavier Sonata. The fugue variations are marked fortissimo and give the impression of a great struggle to overcome adversity. This struggle is also represented by the countless clashes and dissonances between the voices, which give this piece radicality that will not be matched before the music of the 20th century. The second variation adds a Bachian counter-subject in triplets, adding to the complexity. We experience several strettas, meaning that the next theme enters before the first one is finished, adding urgency and excitement. Here is an example where the cello rudely interrupts. After a cadence in D minor and an attempt to go on in a more casual tone, the third variation enters with a riding motif as counter-subject. In the fourth variation, the 10th leap theme becomes triplety and the main theme has lost its rests. After an abrupt modulation and a sudden stop on a fermata, we find ourselves in the world of G-flat major. Only at a second glance do we realize that the undulating figure passed between the violins is nothing less than a transformation of the main halftone theme. After a few bars of peace, the theme creeps back in, legato and pianissimo, making this section into another fugue. This episode ends with a quasi unisono, which reminds us of the closing section in the first movement of the quartet, and leads us to the 6/8 Allegro molto e con brio. Our main halftone motif dances in trochaic meter through the voices. The next series of fugues enter with the theme in its original pace in the cello. The counterpoint is the newly formed dance motif, but in inversion, falling instead of rising. At the second entrance, we add the motif at a middle speed, rising, and so we have a fugue in 3 different speeds of the motif, like in Bach's Art of Fugue. This turns into an infernal ride where fragments of the theme are chipped off. The trill becomes obsessive and we descend in 13 steps all the way around the circle of fifths. The next variation features a triplet motif that again stems from the theme. We cadence in E-flat major, and for the last fugue, the second theme with the 10th jumps returns, creating a feeling of returning home. Finally, as a result of all our hard labor, we arrive at a glorious synthesis of the material. The main theme is hymn-like and sung simultaneously in its original form and in inversion. The lyric motif from the Meno mosso is radiant, and the 10th motif gives affirmative comments. Subsequently, we get a short recapitulation of the story, touching again on the 6/8 dance and briefly the very first fugue and a questioning meno mosso excerpt, to be answered by a resounding confirmation in the form of the extended and completed main theme in a grand unison. It is a brilliant resolution. The themes no longer in conflict, but moving forward together joyously and harmoniously into the world.